Last July, I wrote an article about oil pulling. Can it help with fighting disease? I mentioned at the time that I was waiting on results for whether I did in fact have neuralgia or not. Here's an update and the result from that episode. The results from the MRI came back negative, which is good, in that the specialist was looking for a tumour, a blood clot, or signs of multiple sclerosis, ruling out any of the major causes for neuralgia. What was found from the blood tests was, unfortunately, a series of red flags in the testing for autoimmune disease. What the specialist was concerned about was that the mothership of autoimmune disease, the anti-nuclear antibody, showed positive, along with about 5 others. The next step was to wait 3 months and retest or come back and see him if the symptoms became worse. Armed with this new information, I went home and made a decision. I needed to pull more coconut oil. My decision was based on 2 things. 1, coconut oil is known for its ability to cure many diseases and conditions. From sinus congestion to Alzheimer's and everything in between, coconut oil is by far the best one-stop medicine chest. 2, the technique of oil pulling has a long history of treating and aiding the health of the mouth and consequently the health of the body. My thinking was either the nerve pain was caused from a tooth infection that had not been detected on an earlier x-ray from the dentist, or that because of testing positive to autoimmune antibodies, that my body was in a major battle to fight off inflammation and infection. At the very least, coconut oil could not do any harm, and at the very best, it could be the aid cure to the problem. Besides all this, I was still in a fair bit of pain in my jaw. While the extreme spectrum of pain had shifted from a travelling pain from my temple and down through the eye, mouth and throat, it had now become this constant ache in my upper and lower jaw. I needed pain relief, and I wasn't interested in taking prescription medicine. Oil pulling relieved my tooth pain. I started oil pulling immediately when I got home and noticed instantly a subsiding in the pain in my jaw. Success! I continued oil pulling twice a day for the next 2 weeks, each time noticing that immediately following the pulling, the pain would subside. The pain didn't completely go away, but it became bearable. This was August of 2012. 2 weeks later, something weird happened. A sac of fluid had formed on my gum directly below the tooth that had been x-rayed. I knew the coconut oil pulling had worked in some way. The sac was the plumb line from the infected tooth. While that sac was on my gum, the fluid from the infection had somewhere to go. I kept oil pulling, as the gum where the sac was would get quite sore, and really I was hoping that the oil pulling would eventually deal with the infection and eradicate it. By October, it had not shifted, and it was becoming quite annoying, despite the oil pulling therapy. I had a scheduled visit at my dentist for my kids, and while I was there I asked her to have a look at it. She confirmed what I knew, that it was a plumb line, although she was convinced that it was from a nerve that had died and therefore possible root canal would have to be thought about. She sent me for a scan, which by the time I got around to doing it, it was in fact February 2013. Partly this was because of timing with birthdays, Christmas, holidays and school preparation. But also, I was avoiding what might show up on that scan. A few days after the scan, the tooth in question cracked, and a few days after that, the filling fell out and the sac and its contents went down. I took the scan back to my dentist along with my broken tooth and hoped and prayed for the best outcome. My dentist was convinced it was a dead nerve from what she could see. I broached the subject of having the tooth pulled rather than root canal. She advised against it, as it was one of my 3 grinders which in her opinion would cause stress on the other 2 teeth, causing possible fractures in these teeth in the future. It was a good point which I understood. However, faced with the prospect of root canal with a specialist, followed by a crown and a hefty $2,500 fee, I was not impressed and not convinced really that I needed a root canal. I truly believed and had great faith in God that this was not a problem I needed right now. I prayed that the tooth would be fillable and nothing more. My dentist sent me away with a tooth that she cleaned out, packed with an antibiotic swab and a temporary cover. Her instructions were that if the sac did not fill up and there was no further pain, then the tooth was fillable. My dentist was convinced that the sac would swell and that the tooth would need root canal. I was to come back in 7 days. I continued to oil pull. Well, the sac never returned and the pain had gone and I was greatly relieved. I went back in 7 days, only to be sent away again for 2 weeks, just to make sure. In 2 weeks, I went back and my dentist, completely floored and gobsmacked at the fact that she could find no evidence of the tooth needing root canal, cleaned and filled my tooth. Her constant comment for the 30 minutes that I was there was, "It's a miracle." Now this story has 2 points to it. One, I truly believe that the oil pulling did in fact draw that infection out into the open. There was no doubt it alleviated the pain. 2, never underestimate the power of prayer. Could coconuts be the fruit from the garden? Whether God recommends oil pulling or not, I'm not sure, but He does give us every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth and every tree that has fruit with seed in it will be yours for food and for healing. Success stories of oil pulling. This is an excerpt from Bruce Fife's book, Oil Pulling Therapy. Perhaps the most convincing and motivating evidence for the effectiveness of oil pulling are the personal testimonies of hundreds of people who have done it. A therapy isn't any good if it can't produce results. Oil pulling produces results. The quickest and most obvious results are improvements in oral health, cleaner teeth, fresher breath, healthy pink gums, and less bleeding. Oral infections are reduced or eliminated, followed by an improvement in systemic conditions. Oil pulling could possibly have eliminated autoimmune disease. Way back at the beginning of this story, I mentioned that I needed a follow-up on blood tests for autoimmune disease. The specialist had referred me back to my GP with the list of bloods that needed to be done after a 3-month break. Now, this isn't the first time that my bloods have come back positive or had inconclusive results for autoimmune disease. It's something that seems to raise its ugly head every so often in my life, and I know that autoimmune conditions can be very sneaky and somewhat mysterious in how they present themselves. I have been told that I shouldn't be surprised if one day I awake with a whole host of symptoms from a condition that has laid dormant for a long time. I ignore these comments most of the time as I don't have the time or stress levels that would cope with pondering on such negative information. The good news is the blood tests came back negative. I often wonder if, while my focus was on fixing a tooth infection, the oil pulling did in fact pull out other nasties from my system at the same time. Here's how to oil pull. 1. Take 1 teaspoon to 1 tablespoon of coconut oil, either melted or solid. 2. Put in your mouth and start a chewing, swishing action. If your coconut oil is solid, you will need to chew it a bit to get it to a liquid. Otherwise, heat it gently in a microwave or warm pot of water. 3. Swish or pull the oil for at least 20 minutes. If you can't manage that amount of time, then start with 5 minutes and work up to 20 minutes. 4. After 20 minutes is up, spit the oil into a bin, not down the sink, and rinse your mouth several times with water. Optional, brush your teeth afterwards. If you would like some good reading references, go to coconutoilpost.com/books.